welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. With me tonight is my co-host, Ben Dunaire. We are joined this evening with Susan Robbins from the University of Houston Graduate School of Social Work.
Graduate College of Social Work.
Okay. And I know academics tend to be pretty particular about names, so I apologize. We're going to be discussing some things with Susan tonight, but I think the first order of news, of course, was our primary election yesterday, which seems to have surprised all of us with the number of voters that turned out on both parties in the primary election. A lot of the issues of concern to viewers of this program, I think, happen more at the local level than at the national. There's still going to be a runoff on the Republican nomination for Harris County District Attorney, as well as a runoff in the District 22 congressional seat currently held by Mike Lamson. The Democratic primary for president looks like it will continue through at least the next round. So do you have anything to add, Bandu, before we start?
I think you kind of hit it on the head when you said that people concerned with our issues really should get involved at the local levels. And so hopefully quite a few people got their precinct resolutions out last night as far as medical marijuana may be concerned in Texas, or as far as needle exchange programs. And if you are a delegate to the county convention, or hopefully even passing on to the state convention, we're hoping that we can get as much support as possible for any precincts who have passed those medical marijuana resolutions and perhaps needle exchange programs or any other type of resolutions.
Okay.
A resolution that I thought was interesting, and State Representative Sylvester Turner was talking about this, is ending the caucusing forum in the state of Texas for the Democratic Party. And it's an excellent idea because it was a ridiculous process. Some people not ending until 3 in the morning.
Well, of course, a lot of that was just the inability to anticipate the overwhelming turnout.
Right.
I'm not sure that having the precincts select additional delegates is necessarily a good idea, but the precinct conventions, which feed in resolutions, propose planks, which provide the delegates to the senatorial district and state conventions, I think these are examples of grassroots politics at its very best. I mean,
right.
This is where you go into your own neighborhood and talk to your neighbors about what you think should happen. But I think that the Democrats, with their whole concept of super delegates and two levels of elected and selected delegates at the state level, really may be creating problems for themselves that are not necessary. But it's pragmatics at its best. This was a system that was put in place to solve other problems that had come up with delegate selections, and you try something, it doesn't work, you twist a little and try something else. So we'll see what happens.
The unfortunate thing is you try something, it doesn't work, you keep doing it the same way.
Well, that's the Einsteinian definition of insanity, isn't it? Is repeating the same experiment and expect it to turn out differently.
Well, if you take a look at all of our failed policies, policies that we know have failed over and over, or have made no difference, and we put millions, if not billions of dollars into them, particularly drug policy, we keep doing the same thing.
And I know one of the things that I jokingly say that if I ever became king for an hour, the first law I would put in place was I would forbid the use of the word war as a metaphor, because that seems to lead to all kinds of bad policies, whether it's wars against poverty or wars against drugs or wars against terrorism.
A war on education.
It just doesn't work.
We're trying to war against educating people.
Well, before we started tonight, Susan, you and I were mentioning two really big recent news stories. The first was the changes made in sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine, and the second was the recent resolution by the American College of Physicians on medical marijuana. why don't you give us a little bit of background on these things and a little slant about what's going on here?
Okay, well, let's start with medical marijuana. I'm very passionate about this issue. American College of Physicians came out with a very strong statement essentially saying that we should not be putting people in jail who live in states where medical marijuana is allowed and they are medical marijuana patients. They're also saying that we should take a very good look at the disparity in our classifying marijuana as a class 1 drug, which means no medical use, because there is increasing and overwhelming evidence of marijuana being good for a variety of medical conditions.
Yeah, let me step in.
Yeah.
For those of you that are interested in what the science behind this says, that report is about 13 pages long. It's available on the College of Physicians webpage, and of that 13 pages, the last 3 of them are footnotes to some of the recent scientific studies on the medical benefits of marijuana. So it's a great place to find out what the science really says.
You know, I haven't had a chance to read this yet, but I've subscribed to several things online, and Medscape, I saw in the headlines, is they have a study showing that medical marijuana might even be effective for fibromyalgia, which is a very, very difficult disorder to diagnose, let alone treat.
Right.
And one in which people are racked with pain.
Yeah.
So it's the pain states that people go through, and especially fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, and in wasting disease, it's a lot of the metabolic issue. You know, it raises your metabolism, so people are able to eat, but it's also there's a lot of pain involved.
Yeah.
And typical opioid treatments don't really work on fibromyalgia, which people are finding out now.
Yeah.
And I guess we don't understand the pathways yet because we haven't opened the floodway and the gates for funding for medical marijuana studies. But it certainly is. Cannabis has been shown to alleviate, throughout history and throughout anecdotal evidence that it does help in these pain states that we're just not even aware of why it's occurring. Fibromyalgia is a spontaneous occurrence of pain and spontaneous degeneration of the neurons.
I know
so
from talking to pain physicians that about the hardest kind of pain to treat is neuropathic pain. Particularly that associated with amputations and phantom limbs.
Or spinal cord injury.
Opioids don't work very well.
Or diabetes.
Yeah. And cannabis seems to give some relief there. So there are a lot of different areas. You were talking about the failure of us to always look at our policy changes. I can't help but think here that the federal government first came out with its anti-marijuana statute in 1937 and then turned it into a strict criminal law situation with the Boggs Act in 1951. And they keep claiming there's nothing to this medical stuff. But if we look back at the hearings on the original bill in 37, the American Bar Association said there's no need for a law here. We get to the Institute of Medicine report in 98 or 99, where they said there are definite therapeutic benefits. It needs to be studied. It should be made available to some people, even if they have to smoke it now. We now have the College of Physicians report. I mean, this is a place where it's not just a question of relooking at failed policies. It's a question of Congress totally ignoring the science the whole way through.
Not only that, but our scientists are getting out-competed as well by any other country that's able to do these type of laws without having strict enforcement of antiquated laws for no reason. There's already been so much body of evidence that shows that it's a great neuropathic pain reliever. It's a great pain reliever. It helps your metabolism. So why is it that our scientists have to suffer in an already cut market of funding for these scientists, and we're cutting off this entire field of research and that we're not allowed access to? Donald Abrams in San Francisco is one of the first, I believe, one of the first people who is conducting cannabis research in society. So that's kind of one of the first pathways that we're leading on to cannabis and cancer, I believe.
Part of the dilemma is that our government will not let research scientists grow their own marijuana. They have to get it from government sources.
Right.
And in fact, there's a lawsuit now, I believe, by MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, trying to get marijuana research not only funded, but also permission for research scientists to grow their own. Because we know anybody can grow anywhere, and you can grow it in your closet.
Yeah. What happens is under the Controlled Substances Act, the only way a researcher can get access to any Schedule I drug is with a license from the DEA. And for cannabis research, the only authorized source the DEA will allow is their own governmental plantation in Oxford, Mississippi. And the problem here is the researchers complain saying that the cannabis from the government plantation is about floor sweepings and seeds, that it's very, very poor quality. The University of Massachusetts, through one of its professors, applied for a growing license to provide research-grade cannabis. It has gone through the administrative law judge hearing stage in the DEA. The administrative law judge has recommended that they be granted the license, and so far, and it's been many months now, the DEA administrator has refused to rule on the basis either for or against the administrative law judge's decision. But it's a case where the DEA's own hearing judge has said it should be allowed, and the agency is simply dragging its feet to avoid ruling. And that ruling has to occur before it can go to court.
This is not the first time that a DEA judge has ruled positively about other aspects of marijuana,
Right,
and the DEA has Francis Young.
Yeah, you're talking about Judge Young's opinion in 1988 in the first marijuana rescheduling. I'd like to remind the viewers that if you want to participate in our discussion or ask questions, you can call us. The number's on the screen, and we certainly welcome your participation. Part of the thing that has always concerned me about medical marijuana, and this may be essential in terms of the politics of getting it approved, is that we keep talking about marijuana in cancer, marijuana in multiple sclerosis, all of these deadly, serious, life-threatening conditions. But if we go back and look at the history of cannabis when it was a really common legal drug, we find that it was used for migraines, and most migraine medicines don't work for everyone. It was supposed to be the best thing available for premenstrual cramps and menstrual cramps as well as that, PMS as well. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, we all know that the DEA is a bunch of putts. Let's face it, marijuana should be allowed for everybody, and I like the conversation about medical marijuana, but let's face it, it's not anything so terrible that all of us could partake of and do ourselves better health than drinking of alcohol. And I'll let you continue on that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, caller.
Thank you.
Thank you. He's got an interesting point there. And one of the things, several years ago, cardiologists started coming out saying that a glass of red wine a day might be good for your heart. And the anti-drinking crowd immediately went hysterical that if you start advocating a glass of wine a day, you'll turn us into a nation of alcoholics. But I think it brings up another issue. The history of our drug policy has always been to divide into bad drugs and good drugs. And for most of the time, it was really, really simple. Bad drugs were heroin and marijuana and LSD and cocaine, and they were illegal. Good drugs were morphine and codeine and Ritalin, and they were legal, and your doctor could write a prescription for them. But it's been interesting to watch the government's reaction the past year or two when all of a sudden it's not a good drugs, bad drugs description, because the kids are finding out that the opioids from Mama's medicine cabinet work just like the heroin they can buy on the street, that Xanax gives a high of its own, that all of a sudden it's not good drugs, bad drugs, it's drugs that can be used beneficially or unwisely.
And there will always be some people who will misuse drugs,
Yeah.
whether they be legal or illegal. The distinction, as you well know, between a legal drug and an illegal drug has nothing to do with the drug.
That's
It has
right.
nothing to do with whether it can be used medically or how safe it is. It has to do with politics.
Yeah, and right now, the thing we hear all around us is that the most dangerous drug in the whole world is methamphetamine.
Which has been around for a very, very
Yeah.
long time.
But at the same time, people are warning us about how dangerous methamphetamine is. They have no trouble prescribing and giving Adderall, which is an amphetamine,
Yes.
to their children for attention disorders.
The big difference, though, is that the way in which methamphetamine is being made now is extremely toxic. It's not being made in pharmaceutical labs. And any
Yeah.
time you turn a drug from a pill that is taken orally into something that is either injected or smoked or snorted, it becomes more dangerous. But that doesn't
Yeah.
negate the fact that methamphetamine is simply methamphetamine.
It's time for us to take a break, and we'll come back in just a minute.
Blind man sees that things are wrong. Deaf man hears some funny changes. Boss man hears a people's song. Coach his life and rearranges.
Well, Susan, we were talking about the idea that there's not physiologically a clear line between bad drugs and good drugs. But we do know that people can misuse drugs in various ways. The government has tried to insist for 40 years at least that any non-medically directed use is abuse. Does this really counter with what goes on out there?
Well, in the real world, there are many people who use drugs
Yeah.
and use them non-medically. It does not necessarily mean that they are abusing the drugs.
Yeah.
Somebody has a headache, they take somebody else's pain pill, which is medically prescribed for the other person. They are technically misusing the drug because it wasn't prescribed for them.
Yeah.
But if they're using it for pain and they're not using it in deleterious ways, then it's still use.
Yeah. And
It's illegal, but it's still use.
yeah.
Well, how do you make the distinction between misuse and abuse? I guess relating to that, is there a clear, can you?
I can give you some fairly clear definitions.
Sure.
I want to go back to the point that you're making.
Okay.
With the onset of the war on drugs, the government
Right.
took a strong position that any use of an illegal drug is abuse of the drug.
Yeah.
And that would mean a person who smoked marijuana twice in their lives
Okay.
has abused marijuana.
Okay.
Want to take that call?
Okay, caller, you're on the air.
Hi, my name is Stevie Sosa, and I have a question and a comment. My question is, what's really keeping the government from using marijuana as a cash crop? I mean, it can be grown easily in most of the states, and it can really help the states individually put money back into their communities. But what's really keeping the government from doing such a thing like that?
Okay. Thank you.
I don't have an answer to that. Do you?
Excellent question.
And this has been kind of a hobby horse. So right now, or the last figures I saw said that marijuana was probably the fourth or fifth largest cash crop in the United States. In at least a couple of states, it might be the biggest cash crop. But on the other hand, there's not as much money there as we think. The price people pay for marijuana is not the price of marijuana, it's the price of illegality. If you look at other agricultural products that are grown and prepared in much the same way, tea in tea bags cost about $1 an ounce. Roasted ground coffee costs about 40 cents an ounce. Tobacco in cigarettes with all of the taxes piled on it is about $4 to $5 an ounce. Why does marijuana cost $100 an ounce? And what would it cost if it were legal? Likewise, heroin that currently goes for around $100,000 a kilo or 2 pounds, when it was legal, sold at exactly the same price as aspirin. Bayer manufactured both of them. You can buy aspirin in generic bottles of 300 milligram tablets retail for $30 a kilogram. That difference between $30 a kilogram and $100,000 a kilogram is the price of a black market. So I'm afraid that if the government legalized it, there wouldn't be that great an opportunity to tax and show a profit.
Except they could tax it the same way you tax cigarettes.
Within limits. And
Limits, yeah.
frankly, cigarette taxes, I think, have pushed hard at or maybe gone over the limit. In that with the last round of cigarette tax increases, several of the states have found out that cigarette smuggling has gone way up. For about 50 years, the organized crime has been running a lucrative trade in smuggling cigarettes from North Carolina to New York just to beat the tax on it. 2 or 3 years ago in Britain, over 60% of the cigarettes sold in Britain were smuggled in from Portugal to avoid the taxes. So raising taxes too high creates a different kind of black market incentive. A little tax, yes. Another caller. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Well, I just have a quick comment.
Okay.
I think the previous caller, one of the answers to his question, if the government did legalize marijuana, a lot of people could easily get the seeds and grow their own and just cut the middleman out. And also, I lost my train of thought, but
Okay.
I just wanted to make that comment. A lot of people would cut the government out and grow their own.
Okay.
I think he's made an excellent point. Not only that's another reason why it couldn't be a legal cash crop, but perhaps, people speculate this is why, maybe this is a little bit conspiratorial, but why it's not as marketed as a medical type of product, because pharmaceutical companies essentially cannot make any money off of something that you can grow yourself.
Well, yes and no. I think the pharmaceutical hatred for marijuana is primarily a myth. Granted, THC's been around a long time, so it's not patentable. Granted, the FDA has never been hot about approving pharmaceuticals, and even if they could or did, once again, there's no place for a monopoly or a patent to come into play. But I think more important than that is that botanicals or whole plants like marijuana just don't really fit the paradigm of modern medicine. which is single molecule pure drugs.
Produced by pharmaceutical companies that can then patent it.
Yeah, but once again, there's a lot of room here, even with marijuana. More and more people, rather than smoking, are turning to vaporizers. The British company that has developed the whole plant extract that's being sold in Canada legally now,
Well, so that's
developed an atomizer with a regulated measured dose. So there's lots of room for innovation in delivery methods, even if the drug itself is not patentable.
And I think that's what's a patentable form of cannabis, is that Sativex. It's a sublingual type of spray. As far as Marinol is concerned, though, that's exactly, I guess, an emulsified form of THC.
Well,
so
it was a joke from the very beginning.
Why is that? Explain.
Yeah. At the time of the first petition to reschedule marijuana, and claiming it was a medical use, DEA, they had the argument that marijuana was needed as a medicine. They had that argument off. They decided that they would come up with a pure form of the drug. They couldn't get any of the major pharmaceuticals to handle the development project, so they got a small, unknown generic drug manufacturer to come up with Marinol, which the FDA approved. The DEA could then say, you've got Marinol, you don't need marijuana, it's still illegal. The problem is Marinol for most patients doesn't work. It's prescribed for them, they try it. For one thing, most of them claim it makes them too high.
Yeah, you can't regulate the dose the way that you can if you're smoking
And the second, if you're taking it as an anti-nausea drug, when you can't keep anything on your stomach, it's hard to swallow a pill.
Right. On the contrary, it also breaks down in different forms from Delta 9 to Delta 12 and Delta 8, so it may not be as therapeutic effect as Delta 9. I think we've got a caller.
We've got another caller, I believe. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Isn't it like sort of like a catch-22 by the government keeping marijuana illegal? Because by it being illegal, you keep a lot of probation officers, policemen, lawyers, and I guess state prisons employed. I'll let you comment on that.
Okay.
Author Jan Baum once made a very brilliant statement, brilliant in my opinion anyway. He said that if you took marijuana out of the illegal drug equation, you would have a relatively small illegal drug problem.
Yeah.
So this caller is certainly right on track with saying that what we do with criminalizing drugs and particularly putting marijuana in that mix is that we perpetuate a lot of jobs in the criminal justice system.
Mm-hmm. Well, right now, arrest for simple marijuana crimes across the country is over 700,000 a year. That's over half of all of the drug arrests, and drug arrests make up more than half of all of the arrests. Bindu, before the show started, was mentioning the new study by the Pew Institute of the States that says that 1 American out of every 100 is currently in jail or prison. The state of Texas has slightly over 171,000 prisoners. It costs the state $24,000 each to keep them in prison for a year. That's an annual prison budget of over $2 billion in the state of Texas. 5 states spend more on prisons than they do on higher education. Now, about $55 billion a year for imprisonment overall in the United States. So, that's money that we could spend on a whole lot better things.
But the willpower to do that isn't there.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, Texas made some changes during the last legislative session when it looked like they were going to have to really send prison budgets through the ceiling. They changed a lot of the parole requirements so that it just simply forgetting to pay a fee or flunking one drug test didn't send someone back to prison for 10 years. They are using more drug courts. They're putting more drug treatment beds in the prison. The idea being to cut this down, but what they didn't do was look at the question, why are we sending these people to prison in the first place? But the sponsor of some of these said that it's time for the legislature to start being smart on crime instead of just being tough on crime. And it looks like that for a long time, the real motive behind drug laws has been that politicians are afraid of being viewed as soft on crime. So maybe the cost is going to push us in a reform direction. They're telling me it's time for another break, so we'll see you back in a couple of minutes. And it looks like a good transition.
Do you suffer from fear of losing your election? Are you terrified that voters will discover you've done nothing to improve their lives? Maybe it's time you talk to your spin doctor about Incarcerex. In clinical trials, Incarcerex has been shown effective at reducing election-related anxieties by making voters think you're doing something about the drug problem. It's simplistic and fast-acting. If your problems continue or get worse, you can always double or triple your dose of Incarcerex. Whether it's addiction, therapeutic use, or just casual use, there's an Incarcerex plan for every American. Best of all, taxpayers, not you, will foot the bill. So talk to your spin doctor about Incarcerex today. Common side effects include loss of civil liberties, police corruption, racial injustice, increased terrorism, threat of HIV and AIDS, and violent crime. Bloated prisons are also a common side effect. Stop taking Incarcerex if bloating lasts longer than 20 years. If you're trying to balance the budget, keep families together, or protect human rights, Incarcerex may not be right for you. Do not mix Incarcerex with the Constitution or common sense. So start taking Incarcerex and keep pretending you're doing something about the drug problem.
Okay, maybe a little of the money I spend on marijuana supports terror and violence.
Right.
And that's because marijuana is illegal.
Exactly.
When I buy a beer, that doesn't support terror because beer is legal, right?
Now you've got it.
So what you're saying is if we make marijuana legal and regulate it like beer, that wouldn't support violence.
Did I say that?
Welcome back. It's time for our update on the news from the world of drug use and drug law from Dean Becker. Hello, Dean. You're on the air.
Thank you, Buford. We want to say hi to your fellow panelists there. I think you guys are having a great show. I wanted to kind of backtrack through my week, if you will.
Okay.
Today on my Cultural Baggage Show on KPFT Radio, I had Catherine Austin Fitz, and we spent about an hour talking about the economic impact of this drug war, how it is used to finance people through the laundering of money, how many corporations are able to inflate their profits 20 to 1 for every dollar they bring in through expanding this drug trade. They can gain 20 through the stock market. Yesterday on the Century of Lies show, we had Phil Smith, who works with DRCnet and Stop the Drug War, writes for the Drug War Chronicle. And we were talking about the opium wars in Afghanistan. I wanted to back up. Someone was asking why the government doesn't make benefit of changing these drug laws. And I wanted to interject this thought that in Afghanistan right now, the peasants make about $1 billion a year from growing flowers on the mountainside and feeding them to their cash cow opium trade. And the traffickers, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, make about $3 billion a year, but then it's inflated to the $100,000 per kilogram you were talking about when it makes it to the U.S. markets. The cartels, the traffickers, and the street corner vendors are the ones that make the ultra billions out of this trade. But it is a means and a mechanism to maintain contacts and favoritism within these various cartels to snitch on one another. And this thing's lasted 93 years since the Harrison Narcotics Act, and we have to step back and look at this. Where is the success in all of this? I wanted to point out next week on the Century of Live show, which airs Tuesdays on KPFT 90.1 at 11:30 a.m., we will have Virginia McDavid. Now, she's running for
seat in the Texas legislature as a Democrat against Dwayne Bohack. I've extended an invitation to Mr. Bohack to join us as well, but she's not quite there. But we're going to talk about law enforcement against prohibition, the need for change, the need to destroy the gangs. I mean, they're haunting what they're up to in our face. And then on Cultural Baggage next week, we'll have John Barak. He is a member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, a former federal official. And want to remind folks, KPFT is at 90.1 FM on your dial. Tuesdays at 11:30 and Wednesdays at 11:30. We have our half-hour shows each Monday through Friday, sometimes Saturday at 4:20 p.m. We have the 420 Drug War News. Wanted to alert folks next week I'll be speaking at the University of Houston on Wednesday. And then the following Tuesday, March 19th, I'll be leading a 3-hour class at Sam Houston University on drugs and crime. And I want to extend this invitation to your listeners. If you would like to schedule a visit to your church, your college, your high school, or any other gathering by a cop, a former DEA agent, a warden, a former warden of a Texas prison, or even yours truly, to talk about this need for change, I urge you to contact Dean at drugtruth.net. And, the marijuana laws are nothing more than the Minority Report brought to life. It has no basis in reality. I thank you for this opportunity to talk to your viewers, and I'll tune in and listen up.
Thank you, Dean. One comment, I would say that if you really hate drug dealers and you want to get rid of drug dealers and get them off the street, take their money away from them. That's all they're after.
Dean made a lot of excellent points. I think especially one of the guest studies having that is Virginia McFadden, or I forgot the name already, but that's running against Dwayne Bohack. He's actually having her speak on his show. I don't know if he has a call-in show or not, but speaking to your legislators and speaking to these candidates is one of the especially most effective grassroots ways to alert our representatives about these issues.
It's not that our representatives don't know.
That's true. I just realized my mistake.
They do know, and many of them will talk to you face to face and say that they support getting rid of the repressive drug laws, but they're not going to vote for it.
Mm-hmm. They're just scared to make a stand and appear soft on side.
And frankly, in some ways, I can't blame them. For most of the last 50 years, for a legislator to speak out against the drug laws was a guaranteed way to lose a bunch of votes. The problem is, if we look at some of the surveys recently, the general public is overwhelmingly in favor of medical marijuana and drastically changed on decriminalization at least. Well, I think we need to educate the politicians that their voters have changed.
Right, I think something that's kind of a notion of that change in Illinois, New Hampshire. Illinois today, their legislature and their state senate just voted or debated at least on a state decriminalization bill. So it's kind of these small steps that are going forth, but I guess realizing that just use of the substance is not complete and utter out of control abuse. And Dr. Robbins, you were talking about that earlier.
Yeah. And hopefully a caller will use is when somebody uses a drug in a non-problematic way. Mm-hmm. In other words, when they use a drug, they do not have negative consequences of that drug based on their use.
I think as an example here, about 2/3 of the population uses alcohol. Most of us show up for work Monday morning not hungover. Most of us do not drive while we're drunk. Most of us keep it in context. Some people don't. Okay.
Abuse of a drug is when somebody uses a drug in a way that causes negative consequences. Mm-hmm. Any of you in the viewing audience who have ever had a hangover, you've abused alcohol. However, most of us, when we abuse alcohol, get smart very quick and say, we're not going to do that again. And we moderate our use, and then we might have a hangover again, but typically we moderate our use, and we don't have ongoing, persistent problems based on that use.
Right.
A fraction of people who use drugs and alcohol cannot do that, or will not do that, whichever. And and they continue to use the drug, and every time they use, whether it be alcohol or any other drug, they have these negative consequences in their life having to do with legal implications, DUIs, getting arrested for getting angry and fighting, which you see a lot with alcohol, more so than other drugs. Residential instability, they're spending their money on drugs, not on their house, not on their rent. All kinds of instability that is based on their inability to keep their drug use
in proportion.
And many of these drugs, we're going to talk about the concept of addiction in a minute, cause at least people to use higher and higher quantities as their body adapts to it.
Right.
And people who abuse drugs simply cannot moderate their use so that they use in a way that is not harmful.
Some people that use
Some people.
Yeah.
The majority of people do not, by the way. It's different with different drugs, but roughly 20% of the people who use drugs, and this includes alcohol, roughly 20% use them in a harmful way, and the other 80% do not.
20%, wow.
15 to 20, it depends on the drug. When you talk about psychedelics, that goes down to 2%. You talk about heroin, it goes up to about 40%. Because heroin has an additional feature to it in that it causes fairly quick physical dependence compared to other drugs.
Okay, now you just threw a term physical dependence out there. Right. I think most of us hear the term addiction. Are they the same, or is there a difference?
Physical dependence is not addiction. Physical dependence is a property of a drug. And some people who become physically dependent also become addicted. Some people who become physically dependent do not become addicted, and they stop using the drug.
I think one thing, if someone's taking an opioid for pain, they'll probably become physically dependent, yet at the same time they don't have the psychological dependency, and with proper treatment, if necessary, they can withdraw from the drug.
In fact, most people who take opiates for pain do withdraw from the drug eventually.
We have another caller. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
My name is Faye Clark.
Yes.
And I'm a CI presently. And I have a question. Given the increase in drug crime-related offenses and the fact that the DSM-4 now accepts drug abuse as a disease, why don't we see more treatment-oriented programs for drug use-related offenses, etc.?
Okay, thank you. Susan, there's your good sociological question.
I think we have to separate out these points.
Okay.
When you say drug-related offenses, most of the drug-related offenses are because the drugs are illegal.
Yeah.
It's not because of the effects of the drugs in general. I'm not saying never, but it's much more rare. We talked about the DSM before.
Yeah.
The reason we don't see more treatment is because federal dollars and state dollars are overwhelmingly spent on interdiction and deterrence rather than on treatment. And that's a policy decision that somebody has made.
I might throw a little history in here. When Nixon started the modern war on drugs, he viewed it, and his public statements were that the war on drugs would be a three-legged stool. There would be source suppression overseas, there would be criminal enforcement of the laws here, and there would be treatment for users. And his first equivalent of the modern drugs happened to be a doctor who developed methadone treatment of opioid addicts. But when Reagan decided that bumper sticker slogans were better than thinking, and the drug war became just say no, money for treatment just practically disappeared. Anyway, go ahead,
We were talking then about the difference between drug abuse and drug addiction, and this also speaks to the heart of what the caller said, too. I don't like the term addiction because it gets so misused, and we can be addicted to love, addicted to relationships, addicted to all kinds of things. When you put a drug in your body and your body physiologically adapts to that presence of that drug, and you behaviorally adapt, something happens in the brain. All of these drugs are psychoactive drugs, and they affect the brain. People who are drug dependent, and it doesn't have to be physical dependence, or I'll even use the term addicted, have a different pattern. They are now compulsively using drugs, day in and day out. Very often, and this is the weak piece, they report craving the drug I say there's a weak piece because you can crave other things and not be addicted. But they have now reorganized their life around getting that drug. That's different than simply using a drug and abusing a drug.
I think part of the DSM language is something like they know that their use is harmful to them, but they are unable to avoid continuing it.
And I like how you've made the distinction between your body will adapt and possibly have a physical dependence, as opposed to there are not people who are endogenously pre-programmed to be addicted, if you will.
Okay. I believe we have another caller. A caller, you're on the air.
Yes, hi. Can you please tell me, it's my understanding that, alcohol being pervasive in this society and legal, it's my understanding that there are more deaths, injuries, and hospitalizations and costs associated with abuse of alcohol than all the other illegal drugs combined by far. Tobacco as well, I guess. But my question is, if alcohol is, number one, is it a drug? And if it is officially a drug, then why isn't more made about this absurd difference in policy support and so forth? And why isn't it harped upon more that alcohol is a drug and therefore we're really putting all of our eggs and our people in prisons for the wrong reason?
Okay,
I'll hang up and let you respond.
Thank you, caller. Okay, Susan.
It has to do with the history of alcohol, and I will also answer that tobacco.
Yeah.
The highest death rates of all of the drugs that we've been talking about are caused tobacco, number one, between 400 and 450,000 deaths a year from the direct consequences of smoking cigarettes, and alcohol between 100 and 150,000 deaths a year.
Right.
Those are two substances that have been in our society and ingrained in our economy since the beginning of the United States, and they're not about to go away in that sense. Alcohol is a psychoactive drug, just as nicotine is.
Right.
Any drug, any substance that enters your brain and can affect your moods, thoughts, and behaviors is a psychoactive drug.
Well, let's don't forget the most popular psychoactive drug in the United States, the one that's used by 85 to 90% of the population. That's caffeine.
Yeah.
And it's also addictive.
Yeah, but the difference is that there are some drugs that really impair your ability to function, and others don't. And the bottom line is most people who drink alcohol are not problematic users.
Yeah. And most of them don't develop the alcohol-related illnesses either. It's time for another break. We'll see you in a minute or two.
The drug was administered in a drink of water given at the start of each day's exercise. 25 minutes later, the first effects of the drug became apparent. The men began to relax and to giggle. But this man was more seriously affected and had to be removed from the exercise. After 35 minutes, one of the radio operators had become incapable of using his set, and the efficiency of the rocket launcher team was also very impaired. 10 minutes later, the attacking section had lost all sense of urgency. Notice the bunching and indecision as they enter a wood occupied by the enemy. Almost immediately, the section commander tried to use a map to find the location of troop headquarters, and a prisoner's escort had to have the way pointed out to him, although it was in plain sight, 700 yards away over open country. 50 minutes after taking the drug, radio communication had become difficult, if not impossible, but the men are still capable of sustained physical effort. However, constructive action was still attempted by those retaining a sense of responsibility, in spite of physical symptoms. But 1 hour and 10 minutes after taking the drug, with one man climbing a tree to feed the birds, the troop commander gave up, admitting that he could no longer control himself or his men. He himself then relapsed into laughter.
Moving too fast to take time for the things you really enjoy? Positiva can help bring back the pleasure of activities you used to love. Some of the highlights of Positiva may include increased appetite, lower blood pressure, and significantly lower stress. People who take Positiva discover a whole new outlook on life. Positiva may not be right for everyone. Consult your physician today. Positiva. Now you have a choice, a positive choice. For more information, visit us online at www.normal.org.
Good evening. You're watching Drugs, Crime, and Politics on Houston Media Source.
Grown from different regions.
Okay, we've been talking with Susan Robbins, and we've been talking a little about drug dependency. And one thing, pretty much the history of addiction research is that withdrawal and breaking dependencies is a pretty hard road to go. I think the old federal figures were that about 85% of those going through withdrawal therapy relapsed within a year, and it usually takes several times. One alternative to this, at least with opioids, has been maintenance therapy, where rather than trying to break the addiction, they simply supervise the dependent person on a regulated dosage, and they're able to conduct their lives quite well. Do you have any comments about the difference between trying to force people to withdraw and maintenance of some kind?
You know, it's funny. In our society, we are a drug-using society. Take a look at any television program, any magazine, and you're going to see that we use drugs, and we have them marketed to us all the time. Mm-hmm. It goes back to attitudes. There are certain drugs that we don't want people to use, and methadone is one of them, by the way.
Yeah.
No matter how successful it is at keeping people off of heroin, it is still seen as being a moral issue that people shouldn't have to use drugs, or at least not that drug, but I'm okay with my Valium, I'm okay with my Xanax.
Interestingly, when methadone was first being pushed, one of the things they said about it is it satisfies the heroin craving, but it doesn't give people the high.
It does everything that heroin does.
Okay, yeah.
It does everything that heroin does, except you don't get the euphoria from it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
In a similar way, people who are in pain, chronic pain, do not get euphoria from opiate-based painkillers.
Right.
They just simply get out of pain.
Yeah.
Or especially cannabis-based painkillers as well.
Well, the high is not... Cannabis works on different receptors, and the high, there's no way you can compare a high from cannabis, from marijuana, to a high from heroin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They work on different receptors.
And I think that's another problem, is that most people, when they talk about illegal drugs and drug abuse, seem to lump everything together. But when you look, if you look at the distinctions between euphorins like marijuana, psychedelics like LSD or psilocybin or MDMA, stimulants like caffeine or cocaine or methamphetamine, opioids like heroin or morphine, these are radically different in the way they affect the body and the way people behave.
You know, a lot of what I call the rat research. Researchers run rats around mazes, and they also test drugs on them.
Yeah.
There are certain drugs that act so directly on the brain in terms of their ability to reward the brain that rats will self-administer them.
Yeah.
Those drugs are alcohol.
Yeah.
Among those drugs are alcohol, any of the opioids or opiates.
Yeah.
Barbiturates, Valium-type drugs.
Right.
Cocaine.
Yeah.
In any form, and amphetamines.
Right.
Those have very direct rewards in the brain.
As I understand from some of the research, when rats could administer cocaine directly into their brain, they would do this so often they forgot to eat.
Yes and no.
Okay.
What the research actually says is if they have unlimited supply, in other words, they're on a constant reinforcement schedule as opposed to intermittent.
Right.
You put those same rats on an intermittent schedule and they will not kill themselves.
Okay. So, but total differences in the way the brain reacts to these substances.
Yes, and marijuana just simply doesn't work on the same receptors, and therefore it doesn't have the same kind of quote-unquote addiction potential.
Yeah.
That's not to say that it doesn't have problems associated with its use, because every drug does, legal and illegal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've often thought that if we applied the Controlled Substances Act literally, sugar would be a Schedule 1 drug. I mean, after all, it's something that we take for its effect on our mood or the way we feel. It has no, except for glucose solution, has no direct medical use in the country. And even under medical supervision, you can't really use it safely. So it's really what you want to call a drug.
I'd like to make another comment about something you said before about how hard it is for people to quit.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a different tactic. I'm going to
Okay.
say quitting isn't hard. Anybody can quit any drug. Staying quit is the hard part.
I think Mark Twain said quitting smoking's easy. I've done it thousands of times. Yeah.
In the beginning of my career as a substance abuse counselor, which I've done, I worked with hardcore junkies.
Yeah.
And as their tolerance level rose and they couldn't afford to shoot anymore, they would go cold turkey for 2 or 3 weeks, not because they wanted to quit, but to get their habit down where they can afford it.
Yeah.
And if anybody can quit a drug, and that's a very ugly, ugly withdrawal.
Yes.
Again, it's not quitting that's a problem for most people. Some people might have a problem with that, but it's stay and quit. It's finding the resolve, first of all, to stay off the drug, and also the techniques to stay away from the drug users who are now your friends. It really means changing a lot of things in your life.
Yeah. I think as a parallel to this, I've been noticing reports on various gastric surgeries for weight loss, and these do seem to work for the weight loss. I mean, if people can't eat very much, they are going to. But a surprisingly large number of these people develop drinking habits or drug habits. They still go through the same sort of driven behavior, even if they switch substances. Yeah.
I go to any AA meeting and the walls are covered with nicotine.
And coffee.
Not to say that the replacement is a bad thing per se. You're switching from one greater evil to a lesser evil, perhaps.
Well, if you're taking a drug on which you can't function very well, and you're switching to a drug that lets you function, that certainly is a more desirable outcome.
Oh, interestingly, and here, anecdotes, it's not real evidence-based science, but I know a lot of people who smoke marijuana now who tell me that they used to be junkies or they used to be drunks, and that marijuana helps keep them straight. So,
I haven't seen research on that, but it's certainly
as I say, I haven't seen research either.
Perhaps,
but,
when we start opening the research in the U.S., sorts of sociological studies like that can be done, if it's kind of a more healthy replacement.
We're about to run out of time. The big news in Texas yesterday were the primary elections. The word I have been hearing from all lips this whole political season has been the word change. And I think it's pretty clear that come this next November, there are going to be changes in the makeup of our government. My own feeling, which is not necessarily backed up by any of the pundits or the polls, is that these changes are going to be very, very drastic. You can make the changes go the way you want to by being careful with your vote and contacting those people you elect and remind them you've hired them. Any last comments, Susan?
I would urge people, one of the buzzwords right now in medicine and psychotherapy is evidence-based. Insist with your politicians that we have evidence-based policies about drugs.
Okay.
Exactly. In the preceding months and in the next few months, we're going to hear all about presidential primary coverage. The biggest change you can make and the biggest evidence you can see is in your own local elections. That's where the grassroots starts. It begins with you. So.
And remember, for the next few months, you can do more than simply write your representatives. You're going to have an opportunity to fire those that haven't been listening to you. So pay attention to your politics, and we will see you in another week or two. Actually, they're telling me we've still got a couple of minutes left. So I think that
the present policy of drug prohibition is hopeless. It is hopeless. It will never get better. Literally, victory today is being defined as slowing down the pace of defeat.
We ought to listen to science and medicine when it comes to whether marijuana or any other substance has a medical benefit.
The fact that marijuana is a less dangerous drug.
We're going full-blown into a program that has failed and failed every other time we've tried it. Please point out one success in 30 years of an eradication program that has stopped drugs from coming to this country. Point out one success, because I reviewed that research and there's none.